everybody. Welcome back to another episode of The Breakdown. I'm Doc. This is my buddy Keegin. We're going to talk about ammunition tonight.
Yeah, specifically pistol ammunition. These are all really common semi-automatic handgun cartridges. Pistols and revolvers use pretty different cartridges fundamentally, so we'll get into revolver cartridges in another episode, but today we're going to focus on semi-automatic cartridges.
So we thought we'd start with 380 in particular. There's a lot of talk about handgun cartridges, what you need, what'll work. We thought we'd put a little of those issues to rest.
Yeah.
We hear a lot of comments about knockdown power, stuff like that, ballistic coefficients, things like that. For handguns in particular, especially when you're using a self-defense one, we want something that's going to work, stop the threat, that type of thing. You know, and we've heard in the past, well, 380 isn't enough. And we beg to differ on that one.
Yeah.
The new 380 bullets in particular make a 380 an incredible self-defense firearm.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got a few examples of 380s. All right, typically the 380 has a 90-95 grain bullet. It's literally the same diameter as a 9mm bullet.
Mm-hmm.
Very few people know that, but at any rate, it's a very similar 9mm and 380 on the projectile. This is an example of a target round, little copper jacket, solid full metal jacket type projectile in here. Mm-hmm. And this is a 380 self-defense round, hollow point. I don't know about you, Keegan, but I hate to get shot by one of those.
No, not at all.
Leave more than a little mark on that.
Yeah, and the thing about a 380 is if you can hit something once, you can probably hit it 4 or 5 times pretty rapidly.
Yeah, that's an excellent point.
Yeah.
You know, with a 380, your chance of getting another shot off and a lot less felt recoil, a 380 is really a neat little handgun to consider.
Yeah. Most of the 380s you see nowadays, especially the Ruger LCPs, I mean, they're really small guns. They're fitting your palm sized. Not the easiest to shoot, but again, you're not going to get a 9mm that small. Another important distinction between the two is the pressure difference. So 380 is a quite a bit lower pressure round. Because it's a lower velocity and the casing's a little bit shorter, a little bit less powder in that casing. Doesn't kick quite like a 9mm, but it's also lends itself to a little bit simpler pistol design. So you can have a straight blowback pistol, a lot less moving parts, you know, a lighter slide to pull, all that good stuff.
And there's another excellent point, pulling that slide back.
Yeah.
A lot of people with hand problems or weak hands, you know, just can't get that slide to rec properly.
Right.
Well, with a 380, it's going to work out wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives you a great self-defense option.
Yeah, getting into a 9mm, your pistols are almost always going to be some sort of a locked breech design, a little bit more complex. They're generally going to cost a little bit more. It gets a little bit larger handgun physically. But of course, then with 9mm, a lot of these Wonder 9s, people call them the high capacity stuff. You know, you're getting these micro compact pistols, 13, 14 shots. The bigger pistols are even up to 20 shots in a lot of instances. Got a full metal jacket bullet here, just a 115 grain range round, round nose. So like we were saying, the 380 and the 9 are only a couple of millimeters difference in case, but there is a little difference in power between the two. I'm just showing off a 9mm defensive round here.
We're talking about critical defense 9mm. 9mm, you know, as we were discussing, probably one of the most popular handgun calibers in our nation right now, probably even in the world.
Yeah.
You know, they make a few varieties of them. 115 is a typical grain weight. They go up to 147. They even have some really neat, unique, new style of projectiles out.
Yeah, this one in particular is from Federal. It's in their Syntec line. So this is actually a 150 grain projectile. Moving a little bit slower than the 115 grain or a 124 grain would be. But it's still, because of that mass, it generates enough inertia to run a slide on most handguns. But it's subsonic inherently. So it's actually going to be below the sound barrier, so a little bit quieter. Still need ear protection. We're not that quiet yet, but the synthetic jacket's pretty neat. We're seeing that more often now, not just from Federal, but it's almost like a powder coat. They just spray it on the bullets. It's a little bit more cost effective than copper. It runs a little bit cleaner, cooler, less friction, less fouling.
And less recoil too. It's a noticeably less felt recoil round. You know, when you first shoot them, you're thinking, you know, man, is it even going out the end of the barrel?
Right. Yeah.
You know, but it really is. It got good downrange flight to it, and again, you just do not feel that massive recoil. A 9 will give you. It still has the same bang to it, but
yeah, it's definitely less of a high pressure snap. You're delaying the opening a little bit more. Speaking of high pressure, 40 Smith & Wesson. This is a really high pressure round, quite a bit more so than any others we have here today. Kind of started off as the 10 millimeter, and then they kind of detuned it, shortened it a little bit, made it the 40 Smith & Wesson. Really took off with law enforcement in the late 80s and early 90s.
Oh, law enforcement, a lot of FBI even requires those yet.
Yep.
It has to do with, what the bullet's going to do downrange, what its ballistic coefficient is. There's a lot of comparatives between the 40 and the 45.
Yeah.
40 was actually developed, as kind of an interim, not quite as heavy as a 45,
Exactly.
but heavier than the 9.
Kind of the Goldilocks caliber.
Yes.
And that's not a new idea. The 41 Magnum was that in the 70s. There's even back into the Wild West times. You're always trying to find the best of the sizes between the big bore and the small bore high velocity stuff. But there is a pretty broad spectrum of 40 caliber ammunition. Most of your standard like this is Blazer brass, just a full metal jacket, 180 grain. It's still pretty high pressure, quite a bit higher than the 9s. When you get into some of the defensive stuff, some of this stuff can be pretty snappy. It's still not anywhere near a 10 millimeter, especially defensive 10 millimeter round.
Right.
But nobody wants to get shot by a 40. Nobody wants to get shot by any of these, especially. But yeah, you're still maintaining some of the capacity of the 9. They did have some issues with some of the earlier designed guns not being able to handle it because they were designed as a 9 millimeter and then upsized to 40. But a few pistols were designed from 40 caliber from the get-go. So those are pretty excellent guns. Some of the Heckler & Koch guns in particular.
And the Beretta 96 was actually developed before the 92 9 millimeter version. It was kind of neat, to see them actually take a 40 cal, a heavier caliber round firearm and detune it so it actually works better as a lesser caliber.
Right. And moving right along, back into quite a bit lower pressure, the 45. This round's been around a long time. Not quite as long as 9 millimeter. 9 millimeter came around actually, I believe, 1905 or 06, somewhere in there. The 45 actually debuted in everybody's favorite handgun, the 1911.
Yeah, and we all love those.
Of course.
Yes.
That's a staple. Classic 230 grain load, moving maybe 750, 850 feet a second, somewhere right in there. So the recoil impulse is quite a bit different than most other handguns. Even if you had apples to apples comparison, you got a Glock 45 caliber and a Glock 9 millimeter caliber. They're going to behave a little bit differently. 45 is a bigger, slower moving bullet. Still generates some energy downrange.
Oh yeah.
Speaking of that knockdown power.
You bet. Yeah, the whole knockdown power comment started with everybody's love for the 45.
Yeah.
And a lot of the semi-automatic pistols that we use today are always compared to the 45. And of course, the round itself is one that everybody always likes to compare it to.
Yeah, everybody wants to shoot some 45s, even if they're not really into guns. Everybody has heard of a 45. Yeah, pretty neat history on these. The military members were going into, I believe it was the Philippines, during one of the insurrections around the turn of the century, and we're still using old 38 caliber double action revolvers, and we're needing something a little bit heavier. So that's when the military, while they were adopting the semi-automatic 1911, they said, no, it's going to have to be a 45.
You bet. And it really answered a lot of prayers for a decent handgun at that point.
Absolutely, yeah. Big time.
Yeah, the 45 will always be one of the staple. That 1911 platform is the way a semi-automatic needs to function. The triggers are phenomenal in there, a lot different than a striker fire or any of the other type of semi-autos could ever be. They always wish to be a 1911 style firearm.
Right.
We like them all, but we have our preferences on some of the fine tunes of those.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, getting back to the knockdown power thing, what's sufficient. Honestly, the most important things, in my opinion, are having your tools with you and knowing how to use your tools. At that point, if it's a 380 and you know how to shoot your 380 and it's with you and you've got extra magazines and you've been to classes and stuff, that gun's probably going to serve you just fine. Same thing can be said about the 45.
Well, and at defense, distances, typically you're going to be 3 to 4 yards away from a
very
threat.
close.
So at 3 to 4 yards, around like this 380 hollow point is going to do its job. It's going to go to work for you and protect you.
Yeah, you got to get your tool out and get it into the fight. And generally, the first guy that gets shots on target's usually the victor.
Yes.
So that's why we train.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said about the bullet itself, but you have to place it in the right area.
Absolutely.
You have to be able to go back and have a follow-up shot if necessary. So there's nothing better than to practice, get used to the tools that you use to go to work in a situation like that, and be proficient at that.
Yep. Yeah, if you've got a 44 Magnum and you hit the floor in front of you 6 times, then maybe you were better off with the 380.
Yeah, it's not doing you any good.
So if you haven't ever shot, maybe you only have a 9mm and you've never even dabbled in any of these other pistol cartridges, and believe me, this is not even scratching the surface. These are your top tier common, most common pistol cartridges that we see and sell. There's a lot of stuff that's gone by the wayside as years have gone by. There's always new stuff coming out too. So,
and we're always advocates of trying different calibers, revolver, semi-automatic, different caliber in the semi-automatic, different calibers in the revolvers. Always try something new. It'll make you appreciate what you have and the tools that you have available to you, and always give you a great idea of what you might need in the future.
Absolutely.
So, thanks again for joining us on another episode of The Breakdown. Again, this is Keegan. I'm Doc. Hope to see you again soon.
Thanks for watching, guys.
Come on in and see us at Smoke and Gun Works, 8785 North Baileyville Road, or give us a call at 815-938-3006.